At 3 a.m. on a cold September night in 2013, President Xi Jinping stood alone in his Beijing office, staring at a map that would change the world forever. The red pins scattered across Asia, Africa, and Europe weren't marking military bases. They were marking something far more powerful. China was about to launch the largest empire-building project in human history, without firing a single shot. What Xi was planning that night wasn't taught in any military academy, because the real story of how China is quietly conquering the world isn't about tanks or missiles. It's about something far more sophisticated. Something so brilliant and so ruthless that most world leaders don't even realize they're being conquered until it's too late. This is the story of how China discovered the perfect weapon. Not nuclear warheads, not cyber attacks, debt. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why half the world already belongs to Beijing and why the other half is next. But this story doesn't start in 2013. It starts decades earlier, when Chinese strategists realized something that would terrify Western intelligence agencies. Why invade countries when you can simply buy them? The weapon has a name: the Belt and Road Initiative. And what you're about to learn will change how you see every news headline, every global crisis, every economic partnership announced on television. Because behind every handshake, every infrastructure deal, every development loan, there's a trap so sophisticated that even the smartest economists missed it. Picture this. It's 2017. A small island nation in the Indian Ocean is facing bankruptcy. Sri Lanka needs money desperately. Western banks won't lend. Too risky. Too many conditions. Environmental reviews. Democratic governance requirements. Anti-corruption measures. The process would take years. Then China makes a call. We'll give you $1.5 billion. No questions asked. No environmental reviews. No democracy requirements. Just sign here. The Sri Lankan officials can't believe their luck. Finally, someone who understands their urgency. But what happened next would send shockwaves through intelligence agencies worldwide. Because China wasn't just lending money. They were setting the perfect trap. The money came with one condition. Not a political condition, a commercial one. Chinese construction companies must build the project. Chinese workers must be hired. Chinese materials must be used. Chinese equipment must be purchased by terrorists. Do you see what's happening? The money China lends immediately flows back to Chinese companies. Sri Lanka gets a port, but the actual cash returns to Beijing. It's the perfect economic circle. China gets paid twice. Once for the loan. Once for the construction. But here's where it gets truly sinister. The Hambantota Port was built in the middle of nowhere, near the president's hometown. Terrible location for shipping, almost no traffic. Any competent economist would have flagged this as a disaster. But that was the point. 2 years later, Sri Lanka couldn't repay the loan. The port generated almost no revenue. Default was inevitable. That's when China made their real move. Can't repay the loan? No problem. Give us the port instead. 99-year lease. In one stroke, China had acquired a strategic naval base in the Indian Ocean. Not through military conquest, through debt. They had turned Sri Lankan sovereignty into a Chinese asset. And this wasn't an accident. This was the strategy. They call it debt trap diplomacy. And it's happening everywhere. Pakistan thought they were getting the deal of a lifetime when China offered to build Gwadar port. $43 billion in infrastructure investment. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. A pathway to prosperity. But when Pakistan couldn't repay, China didn't just take the port. They took control of Pakistan's economic future. Today, Pakistan owes China over $60 billion. Their currency is collapsing. Their economy is in Chinese hands. China now controls both ends of the Indian Ocean. Gwadar in the west, Hambantota in the east. They call it the string of pearls strategy. a chain of Chinese-controlled ports encircling India. But India is just the beginning. Kenya thought they were modernizing when China offered to build the standard gauge railway, $5 billion for a beautiful modern railway from Nairobi to Mombasa, the largest infrastructure project since independence. But the railway doesn't make money, operating at massive losses. Kenya struggles to repay. Now China has significant leverage over Kenya's government. Economic dependency creates political influence. When Kenya votes at the United Nations, they vote with China. When China needs support for territorial claims in the South China Sea, Kenya provides it. Debt has become political control. But Kenya is just one country. Let me show you the real scope of this operation. Zambia borrowed billions to develop copper mines. Chinese companies provided loans, built infrastructure, hired Chinese workers. When Zambia considered nationalizing the mines, China threatened economic retaliation. The idea died instantly. Today, China effectively controls Zambian copper production. Africa's second-largest copper producer answers to Beijing. Ecuador accepted $2 billion for the Coca-Codo-Sinclair Dam, their largest infrastructure project ever. But the dam has problems. Cracks appeared within years, equipment failures, Chinese construction quality issues. Ecuador still owes the debt, repays China with oil shipments, sends discounted oil to China as loan payments. Ecuador has lost sovereignty over its own resources. But China's ambitions don't stop in the developing world. Greece was facing financial crisis in 2008, desperately needed investment. China bought Piraeus Port, the largest port in Greece, strategic gateway to Europe. Now Chinese ships unload goods in Piraeus, bypass traditional European ports. Chinese products flood European markets faster and cheaper. China owns critical infrastructure inside Europe. The European Union watches helplessly. And this is just the beginning. China has financed infrastructure in over 150 countries: roads, railways, ports, dams, power plants. Total lending exceeds $1 trillion. Argentina, power plants, railways, dams, billions in Chinese loans. Venezuela, oil-backed loans. Venezuela sends oil, China sends cash and political support for Maduro's regime. Brazil, ports, railways, power grids. China is now the largest foreign investor. China has become the largest trading partner for most Latin American countries, in America's own backyard. While the United States was focused on Middle East wars, China was quietly buying Latin America. But Latin America is just one continent. In Africa, China has financed infrastructure in 40 countries. Total lending over $150 billion. Many African countries now owe more to China than to all Western lenders combined. When these countries vote at the United Nations, they vote with China. Economic dependency creates political alignment. China is building a voting bloc, country by country, debt by debt. So why hasn't the West stopped this? Because initially they didn't understand what was happening. Western governments dismissed Belt and Road as economic development, infrastructure investment, poverty reduction. They missed the strategic implications entirely. Then they woke up. The United States launched Build Back Better World in 2021. The European Union launched Global Gateway, infrastructure investment programs to counter China. But there's a problem. Western money comes with conditions: environmental reviews, labor standards, anti-corruption measures, democratic governance requirements. These are good things, but they slow everything down, require negotiations, demand reforms. Environmental studies take years. Democracy building takes decades. Developing countries want infrastructure now, not in 5 years after environmental reviews. China says yes immediately, builds fast, asks no political questions, no democracy requirements, no environmental conditions. Just sign here. So countries choose China. Speed and certainty over Western conditions and delays. India is trying to compete, building infrastructure in neighboring countries, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. But India doesn't have China's resources, can't match Chinese investment levels. Japan is building high-speed rail in India, infrastructure in Southeast Asia. But again, smaller scale than China. Can't compete everywhere. So China continues expanding. The empire grows. But there are cracks appearing in the Chinese strategy, and these cracks might bring down the entire system. First problem, debt distress. Many countries are drowning in Chinese debt. Cannot repay. Facing economic crisis. Pakistan owes China over $60 billion. Currency collapsing, economy in free fall, political instability rising. Zambia defaulted on Chinese loans. Economic chaos, government barely functioning. Sri Lanka defaulted. Political crisis, government collapsed. President fled the country. When countries default, they become unstable. China's investments become worthless. Projects get abandoned. Second problem, backlash. People in developing countries are noticing. Chinese workers take local jobs. Chinese companies don't hire locally, don't transfer technology, don't build local capacity. Infrastructure benefits China more than local populations. Protests are increasing. Malaysia canceled Chinese projects. Myanmar canceled a dam. Ecuador renegotiated terms. Politicians who accepted Chinese loans are losing elections. New governments demand better terms. Third problem, quality issues. Chinese construction is often poor quality, cutting corners, using substandard materials. Buildings crack, dams leak, railways malfunction. Countries realize they borrowed billions for infrastructure that doesn't work properly. The dream becomes a nightmare. Fourth problem, strategic overreach. China promised too much. Can't deliver everywhere. Projects are delayed. Some canceled entirely. Chinese economy is slowing. Real estate crisis, debt problems at home, less money available for Belt and Road. Investment is declining. But here's the terrifying part. Even with these problems, China has already achieved something unprecedented. They control critical infrastructure in over half the world's countries. They own ports that control global shipping lanes, mines that control resource extraction, power grids that control energy supply, railways that control continental trade. If China controls ports worldwide, they control global shipping. If China owns mines, they control resources. If China finances infrastructure, they control development. And this affects you directly. Every product you buy, every energy price you pay, every economic crisis that reaches your country, because China now has the power to disrupt global supply chains with a phone call. They can shut down ports, cut off resource exports, restrict energy supplies, all legal, all within their rights as owners and creditors. This is empire building for the 21st century, not through military conquest, through debt and infrastructure. So what happens next? I see three possible scenarios. Scenario 1. China completes the empire, reforms Belt and Road, offers better terms to avoid backlash. Countries continue accepting Chinese investment. By 2040, China controls critical infrastructure across most of the developing world. American influence fades, dollar dominance ends, Chinese yuan becomes global currency. This is China's dream scenario. Scenario 2. Managed competition. China continues Belt and Road, but scaled back. Western countries compete more effectively. World divides into spheres of influence. Cold War 2.0. Economic competition, strategic rivalry, but managed. No direct conflict. Scenario 3. Collapse and retreat. Chinese economy crashes, real estate bubble bursts, debt crisis spirals. China can't fund Belt and Road anymore. Projects halt. Loans default everywhere. Countries seize Chinese assets. Belt and Road collapses. Which scenario will happen? That depends on decisions being made right now, in Beijing, in Washington, in capitals worldwide. But one thing is certain: China has already changed the game forever. They've proven that military conquest is obsolete. Economic conquest is the future. And while Western democracies debate environmental standards and democratic governance, China builds ports and railways. While Western politicians argue about conditions and reviews, China signs checks and breaks ground. The empire grows, one port, one railway, one power plant at a time. This is how China is quietly buying the world, not with military force, with loans and infrastructure. And by the time everyone realizes what happened, it might be too late. The Belt and Road continues, the debt trap expands, the empire grows, and the question isn't whether China is building an empire anymore. They clearly are. The question is whether anyone can stop them, or whether the world will simply wake up one day and realize China owns everything.